Well, hello, my fellow MGTOW. First things first, I want to put out a warning regarding this video. This is a secular video. If you're easily offended by religious talk, I recommend that perhaps you skip it and wait for my next video regarding some other subject. It is a video in response to some questions that people have been having regarding the church and their views and MGTOW. And so with that out of the way, I want to start with a couple of passages from the Bible. First, Genesis 2:17, and I quote, "But from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat from it you will surely die." This was God's command. Close quotes here. And this was God's command to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, to not eat from the tree that bared the forbidden fruit, the fruit of knowledge. Following this passage, there's another passage in Genesis 3:13. And in this one, we can read as follows. "Then the good Lord said to the woman, 'What is this you have done?' And the woman said, 'The serpent deceived me, and I ate.'" Close quotes. So, given these passages, it becomes excusable to absolve the woman from at least some of the responsibility of having committed the sin of disobeying God and of bringing about the fall of man. Because she was, after all, deceived. And God Himself created the conditions that led to her eating from the tree of knowledge. In this case, we must bring ourselves to do what some people consider to be unthinkable. We must put God Himself on trial and to question His intentions. Having gotten this out of the way, we are ready to begin talking about the church itself. So what church are we referring to here? We are talking about the Roman Catholic Church and the subsequent Protestant denominations that came about as the result of the so-called Lutheran Revolution. I am talking here about the English Anglican Church, the Baptist, the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, etc. I will also make a brief reference regarding the Muslim faith. I also want to take this opportunity to confess my ignorance of the religious doctrines that have taken root in the far eastern corners of the world. And as a result, I am sorry to say that at this point I am unable to comment on the influence that these religious organizations have had on the marriage contract and on how people live and interact with each other in regards to intimate relationships. So I want to begin by saying that the church has been at this gender war for a long time. The church, an organization that has existed for 2,000 plus years, as in the case of the Apostolic Roman Catholic dioceses, is not new to this game of psychological warfare. Just because you just showed up at the scene doesn't mean that they haven't been in your bedroom for all of this time. Throughout all this time, they were well aware of the nature of woman. By looking in the scriptures, we see that the role of woman in shaping society, as depicted by the church, has left a lot to be desired. As quoted above, in the Bible passages found in Genesis, Eve disobeys God's commandments, only to be followed by other women, the likes of which resemble Lot's wife, a figure first mentioned in Genesis 19, who turns into a pillar of salt after disobeying God's command not to look back at Sodom upon fleeing this infamous city of sin and perdition. As far as the church knew, the first woman and her subsequent sisters were the creation of God via the removal of one of Adam's ribs. She is the original sinner and manipulator. She is but a piece of man, born out of God's knowledge about man's feeling of loneliness. So again, let's look at the church and what they've known for all these years. They've known that man has felt alone. They've known about the nature of women. In fact, they've been keenly aware of women's propensity for manipulation, trickery, and deception. But they chose to remain quiet about it all, especially in these modern times. Did they spot an opportunity for profit in feminist ideology? One can only wonder. Before the great European migration to the Americas, daily life in Western Europe was largely dictated by the canon law of the Catholic Church. However, that is until a letter written by a German friar who went by the name of Martin Luther, dated October 31, 1517, was nailed to the door of Wittenberg's All Saints Church. In this letter, addressed to his superiors, Luther listed his views opposing the then current church practices, and in particular, his belief that the church practice of selling quote-unquote indulgences, that is, purchasing absolvency of sins and salvation for the dead, must come to an end. Arguably, it was because of this letter that Western Europeans began to question the church's involvement in every aspect of their lives. For in medieval Europe, the church dictated nearly every aspect of a family's life. Not only was the church the only organization that really knew what time it was, with the only clock in town often being the one found at the church tower. They told everyone else exactly what that time was. Even to this day, here in the West, we measure time by following the so-called Gregorian calendar, a time tracking device for Christian worship, used for Christian worship as much as for keeping track of the planting and harvesting seasons. And this powerful house of worship controlled more than just time itself. They told people what and where to eat. The very idea of breakfast entailed eating or breaking a fast only after the morning prayers were recited. The Muslim occupants of medieval Europe did not eat pork. This led to the Catholic practice of hanging cured ham and other meats for public display as a manifestation of their faith. And so we have it that to this very day we can see hanging pork meat on prominent exhibition at our local European butchery. The church also held sway over funerary practices, among other things. by, among other things, administering last rites and dictating who could and who could not be buried in the local churchyard. It reigned supreme over the education system, with a network of monasteries that became the precursors to today's universities. The cape and gown draped over college graduates today was born out of a bishop's clothing. But the medieval monastery was more than a walled ecclesiastical teaching center. It was a traveler's oasis, a garden of healing that later became the bedrock of today's hospital system. This much we owe to the church. But for purposes of our discussion here, the church held jurisdiction over who could and could not be united by holy matrimony. Matrimony, not patrimony. And so we have it that the gynocentric church has known about, participated, and at times been deeply involved in this gender war, literally for millennia. Fast forward to today, and we have a new philosophy making waves on the electronic manosphere. An electronically interconnected environment where ideas can be shared nearly or at nearly the speed of light. And so this game is new to us, but it's not new to the church. Every confession made in the so-called reconciliation room, found inside a church, to a priest has not only been utilized in crafting the next Sunday's worshiping section, but has made its way to the annals of the Vatican, where teams of Christian theologians have pondered over it, dissected it, and built a counter-philosophy to go against the idea of man going his own way. What is new in this psychological gender war is the fact that we're all fighting it in an electronic environment, and that because of it, the number of participants has increased dramatically. But some things remain the same. Let's keep in mind that many religious organizations have at their disposal large amounts of financial resources. They also have their very own espionage organizations, as well as people to enforce their interpretations of biblical teaching, canon law or Sharia law. In the West, only the power of the state monopoly over violence, and the concept of the separation between faith and government is there to keep the churches in check. The spy agency for the Catholic Church goes by the name of the Entity. And there is such a book bearing this very name for its title. It addresses this most intimate subject. The Mormon Church has what they call the God Squad, enforcing the religious doctrines of their organization. And little needs to be said about Scientology as a cult, or the violence today seen in the Muslim world brought to us infidels. In posting this video, I will also confess that I'm somewhat afraid, my fellow MGTOW, and that if one day a certain group of people begin opposing what I say in regards to this topic, I may just delete this video and even go as far as to shun the idea of making further comments regarding religious matter. Let us remember that the Church was the creator of the infamous Inquisition, a Spanish kangaroo court created in 15th century Europe for weeding out non-believers by way of torture. Historically, it was this bigoted religious people who brought to use the most diabolical torture devices. We are talking here about anything from a bed of nails to the torture rack or the torture wheel, to being burned at the stake and being jailed without a trial. Let us also remember that the Church has not hesitated to declare and carry out military campaigns against their theological enemies. In the name of love for Christ and repentance, they brought death and destruction to anyone who dares oppose their ideology. They brought the holy war to the Muslims. Since the year 1085 AD, these holy wars came to be known as the Crusades. And the Muslim world responded in kind by fabricating their own version of a holy warrior known as the jihad, he who struggles. For those who dare to go against the teachings of these religious groups, crimes are invented. Blasphemy, that is, the speaking ill of sacred things. Heresy, that is, the crime of non-believing. And apostasy, that is, the renunciation of an entire religious faith. My fellow MGTOW, I affirm that I am myself guilty of these three crimes. But this is how historically dissenters were silenced, in much the same way that MGTOW men are silenced today by feminist warlords proclaiming false crimes having been committed. So it comes as no surprise that these mystical folks will oppose the MGTOW philosophy. They will call it a heresy. They will extol the virtues of traditionalism, for they have much to lose and to gain if the marriage contract remains unchanged. They will make the case that we should adhere to traditional Christian and feminist values. Values like mercy, compassion, forgiveness, charity, altruism, and self-sacrifice. Does this sound familiar? They will state that by abandoning marriage as well as the social contract attached to it, man abandons God himself, as well as the intended wishes of that supreme being. They will say that to go your own way is to go the wrong way, because in doing so you go against the natural order of the universe created by God himself. They will argue that you, the man, never stopped being the nucleus of the human family. They will say that through you and your strength and your noble morality, women and children get to experience the light of God. They will say that no one is more well suited than you to carry on the work of Christ through the church and to bring salvation to an inherently sinful humanity. But let me remind you, my fellow seeker of truth, truth, as much as it can be defined, and freedom, that historically religious doctrine has offered little to man other than feeling good upon submission. That only science and reason and logic, as the fruits of the human mind, have shed any kind of light on humanity as we know it. And today, these religious fanatics use computers and cell phones to attempt to bring man to a sort of medieval dark age, to bring him to his knees, to deliver him to a state of confusion and chaos and violence, where faith in some distant ghost predominates. Do not give in to their agenda. My hope is that you, my fellow man, continue on your path, the path that you have chosen, and to be ever vigilant of these people's willingness to suppress the power of the individual as well as the collective, and for lack of a better word, the collective spirit of man. MGTOW, I thank you for listening to this video. If you liked it and you feel as though you've learned something new, please give it a thumbs up, share, and subscribe. I have a lot more content coming for you in the near future. Thank you very much.